Hello again. Today we are going to talk about variation. So in this lesson we are going to understand how living organisms differ from one another, and also we are going to distinguish between continuous and discontinuous variation. Okay. Before starting with everything, we have to know do we mean by variation. So, as you know that we have differences between individuals like height, weight, um, for example, gender, blood groups. So we have many differences. So the differences between individuals of the same species, so when we are talking about the same species like a human or any type of mammal, so we are talking about the variation. So the differences between individuals of the same species are called variation. Now we have to know that we have more than one type of variation. Actually, variation divided into three types, or actually there are main two types, but the third one is mixed between the first and the second one. Okay, so let's start with the first one, discontinuous variation. Also we have continuous variation, and the third type, continuous and discontinuous variation together. We have many examples of each type, but before we have to understand what are the features of each one. Let's start with discontinuous variation. Actually, we have mainly three features for the discontinuous variation. Here you have to know that it's easy to place the discontinuous variation or discontinuous characteristic into definite categories. So, discontinuous variation, an organism can easily be placed into definite categories. So, it's the first feature of the discontinuous variation. The second thing that you have to know that the characteristics for this variation are usually qualitative. Qualitative means that we cannot measure it. Okay, so qualitative cannot be measured. So discontinuous variations or the characteristics of discontinuous variation are qualitative. The third thing that you have to know that the characteristic in this type of variation are not affected by the environment. They only affected by the genes that the chromosomes carry. Okay, so those are the three features that discontinuous variation have. Okay, now we have many examples. Actually, here they mentioned two examples, which are human blood groups and gender. So you know that for human blood groups we have four groups, which are AB, A, B, and O. So we don't have another choice. So only we have four types of blood. So because we have only four types and we cannot make another new type, so this type of variation is discontinuous variation. Okay? And also for gender, we have only two gender, either male or female. So you cannot be another third gender. So the normal characteristic here, if you are male or female. Now if you look at the graph, you will find that we have here we have bar chart. This bar chart shows the type of the blood. Here they mentioned many properties. Those properties are not affected with environment. Okay, this type of discontinuous variation are not affected with the environment. So here only affected by the genes. So discontinuous variation is due to the effect of genes. We have only four types. What about the intermediate classes? Actually, for discontinuous variation, we don't have intermediate classes. So the bar chart of percentage in a class cannot become a smooth curve. Here we don't have a smooth curve like this. Here we can make smooth curve by finding the intermediate classes, but in discontinuous variation we cannot do smooth curve. And also there can be no dispute about these categories. Dispute means here we don't have boundaries, we don't have range. Okay, so we don't have range between, for example, for column AB we don't have range, but here, for example, we have ranges. Okay, so for discontinuous variation we don't have dispute. Okay, so three main features. Let's go to continuous variation. Actually, you have to know that the characteristic in this variation can have any value within a range. Okay, so here we have range. What are the features? This is the first one, that they can have any value within the range, not as the discontinuous. Discontinuous, we can put them in definite categories. We don't have range. But in continuous, we can make them in range. Okay, what about the type of the characteristics? Actually, the characteristics are usually quantitative, not as discontinuous. We say that discontinuous variation is qualitative, but continuous, actually the characteristics here are usually quantitative. What do I mean by quantitative? Means can be measured. Okay, the third thing that you have to know, that the characteristics here are affected by genes and the environment. So not only the genes, it affects by several genes and also with the environment. Okay, so let's study the chart here of the continuous variation. Here we have many examples of continuous variation, like a human height, body mass, hand span, chest circumference. So we have many examples of continuous variation. So what are the properties of the bar chart of the continuous variation? Focus with me here. You have to know that the bar chart can be drawn as a smooth curve. Okay, we can make a smooth curve, not as discontinuous bar chart. Okay, what they wrote here about this chart, they wrote that continuous variation is due to the combined effects of genes and the environments. We mentioned that. We said that genes and environment can affect with continuous variation. And the second thing, we say that many possible intermediate classes between the two extremes, so we can draw a smoother or smooth curve. Okay, so the curve becomes smoother if the classes become smaller. So here we have the classes, so we can draw a curve. Okay, also we can put boundaries, so there could be a dispute about the boundary. Okay, here we don't have dispute, because here the type, for example, type of blood only give the quality of the blood, but here gives a quantity. So here we have dispute between the boundary. Okay, the last thing in this lesson, or before, we have the third type characteristic can be both discontinuous and continuous. We have two examples for these characteristics, which are hair color and eye color. Hair color can be continuous and can be discontinuous. Let's understand how hair color is continuous. Okay, you know that the hair color appears in a range from black to blonde, okay, within many intermediate colors. So because we have intermediate colors, so here we have continuous variation. So we say that when we have intermediate, so here we are in continuous variation. So hair color can be continuous variation because its range of colors from black to blonde, and it has intermediate colors. How it can be discontinuous? Okay, we have actually the gene of red hair color. Here, the presence of this gene can tell us if the hair color is red or not red. So here only we have two choices, red or not red, like male or not male, so male or female. So when we have the quality of hair, red or not red, so here we are talking about discontinuous situation. So continuous because we have range of colors, and discontinuous because we have the gene of red color, so the hair is either red or not, so we don't have third choice. If it's red, so the hair is red. If it's not red, it will be from black to blonde, one of the colors between this range. This is the first example, hair color. What about eye color? Actually, also eye color can be continuous or discontinuous variation. How? Actually, you know that can be identified, the eye color can be identified as a brown or not a brown. We have two choices, brown or not brown. And this feature of discontinuous variation. Okay? So in discontinuous variation of eye color, so we have brown or not brown eye color. What about continuous? It can be put into a range of many intermediate classes. So if it's not brown, so we have intermediate classes. We have range of many intermediate classes. So we have another eye colors. So actually you have to know here that if it can be measured and given a numerical value, so it's continuous. If we can't measure it, so it's discontinuous. The last thing in this lesson, we have to remember what we mean by phenotype and genotype. We say that genotype, the full set of genes, okay? So when the genotype effects of the environment, okay, that will be reduced phenotype. Phenotype actually is the feature or the observable characteristics of the organism. Okay, so phenotype, we say, for example, phenotype of the eye color, brown or blue. It's the color. Okay, if it's a brown, it could be B capital, B small. It's the genotype. B capital, B small. We are talking about genotype. Okay, for blue phenotype, we have genotype B small, B small. Okay, and those phenotypes affect with the environment. Okay, some phenotype can affect with the environment. So here they wrote that some characteristics result from both genes and environment. So from genes and environment, we are talking about continuous variation. For example, here we have two examples. One of them for plants. A bean seedling has the genes to develop chlorophyll. Okay. So chlorophyll will turn the plant into green. But it won't do so. It won't do. So there will be no color. So unless it receives enough light. So it receives enough light. So because we don't have enough light, okay, so the plant will not make photosynthesis. Okay, here we have another example. A young mammal has the genes to develop a rigid bony skeleton, but it won't do. So unless it receives calcium, it's okay. So here, the first one for plant to take in develop chlorophyll, and here mammal to develop the bony skeleton. Okay, to develop the bony skeleton, the child will receives calcium in its diet. Okay, the most important thing that you have to know, that phenotype, it affected with genotype and the environment, and it's an example, or it's the features of the continuous variation. Okay, thank you for listening and good luck.